What you are about to hear is the story of a forbidden love born within the stone walls of a colonial mission. A young soldier and a devoted woman bound by duty yet drawn together by fate must risk everything for a love the world refuses to allow. The Spanish mission was a place of order, quiet prayer, and rigid rules. Its stone walls stood tall and imposing under the hot sun, hiding secrets within their shadowed corridors. It was within this austere setting that Alejandro, a young soldier from a distant province, found himself stationed, charged with protecting the mission and the surrounding lands. Alejandro was a man of duty, disciplined and reserved, but in the silent hours of his guard, he couldn't ignore the emptiness gnawing at his heart. He had sacrificed much to earn his place as a soldier, leaving behind family and familiar lands, trading them for a solitary existence. It was one afternoon, while he stood on duty near the mission's entrance, that he saw her. Isabel, a local woman, stepped lightly into the mission's courtyard, seeking the sanctuary of the church. The daughter of a local landowner, Isabel often visited the mission to find peace and pray. She was to be married soon to a wealthy suitor, a man her family had chosen for her, someone who would secure her future. But as she moved through the cool shadows of the church, her thoughts drifted away from prayers, her heart weighed down by unspoken dreams and unfulfilled desires. Their paths crossed as Isabel passed by Alejandro. He greeted her with a polite nod, as he did all visitors, but their eyes met for a moment too long. In that instant, Isabel felt an unexpected warmth, a spark ignited by the silent intensity in Alejandro's gaze. He, too, felt an unusual pull, an ache he couldn't explain. They both lingered, the world around them fading as they stood, caught in that shared glance. But duty pulled them apart. Isabel continued into the church, and Alejandro remained at his post, though his heart pounded with a strange, unfamiliar excitement. Days passed, and Alejandro found himself looking for her, his heart quickening whenever she walked by. The silent exchanges grew bolder, their eyes holding longer, their glances becoming silent confessions. One evening, after the mission's doors had closed and the last rays of the setting sun cast shadows on the stone walls, Alejandro found the courage to approach her as she lingered in the courtyard, alone. They spoke in whispers, as though afraid to break the fragile magic between them. Isabel confided her fears about her impending marriage, her longing for freedom, and her desire for something more than a life bound by expectations. Alejandro listened, his own fears and doubts beginning to surface as they shared their secrets under the fading light. From that evening on, they continued to meet in hidden corners and quiet corridors, their whispered conversations turning into laughter, shared dreams, and finally, forbidden touches. The walls of the mission seemed to become their allies, shielding their love from the outside world. But as their love deepened, so did the danger. The mission was a place of discipline, bound by strict rules, and soldiers were forbidden from fraternizing with the local population. Alejandro's comrades began to notice his frequent disappearances, the glances he stole towards the church. Isabel's family, too, grew suspicious of her prolonged visits to the mission, questioning why she spent so much time there as her wedding approached. As days turned into weeks, the bond between Alejandro and Isabel grew stronger, as did the shadows of doubt and fear around them. Their love was a fragile thing, held together by stolen moments and hidden glances. Alejandro knew the risks they both faced. The mission was more than just a place of worship. It was a symbol of Spanish authority, and any breach of its codes was seen as an affront to both church and country. Isabel, too, knew her family would never accept her affection for a soldier of common blood, especially when they had already secured a marriage with a wealthy suitor who would elevate their family's standing. Each meeting was a balancing act between passion and fear. Alejandro would steal away from his duties, hiding within the mission's silent, empty halls, waiting for Isabel to slip away from her watchful attendants. They would whisper of their dreams of a life together beyond the mission walls, away from duty and obligations. Alejandro promised her a future where they could live openly, no longer in the shadows. Isabel, in turn, shared with him the memories of her childhood, the dreams she'd been forced to abandon, and her growing sense of resentment toward the marriage imposed upon her. But their love was never safe from the prying eyes that filled the mission. One day, as they met in the cool, dim light of the mission's garden, they were almost caught. A fellow soldier, suspicious of Alejandro's absences, had followed him. Just as Alejandro brushed a strand of hair from Isabel's face, they heard footsteps echoing off the stone walls. Alejandro quickly pulled her behind a tall column, holding his breath as the soldier's shadow passed. The close call shook them both, reminding them of the constant threat of discovery. Alejandro could face punishment, perhaps even be sent far from the mission or forced into a new post across the sea. For Isabel, discovery would mean public disgrace, the end of her family's carefully laid plans, and a life forever marred by scandal. As if their precarious situation wasn't enough, rumors of war began to spread through the mission. Tensions had been brewing with the local tribes, and Spanish soldiers were being summoned to fortify defenses along the territory's edges. Alejandro received word that he would soon be deployed, leaving the mission and, by extension, Isabel behind. The thought of parting was unbearable, and for the first time, Alejandro felt torn between his duty to the crown and his love for Isabel. Each night, as they met in the shadows of the mission, they discussed the impossible decisions that lay ahead. Isabel, too, was under increasing pressure from her family. Her engagement was fast approaching, and her suitor had begun to make his presence known, frequenting her family's gatherings and speaking of plans for their future. Isabel's heart grew heavy, the walls of her life closing in around her, while her only refuge lay in the forbidden love she shared with Alejandro. She confided her fears to him, her voice breaking as she admitted that she could not bear a life without him. In the soft glow of the mission's candlelight, Alejandro held her close, making a vow to find a way for them to be together, no matter the cost. They both knew that the time they had was slipping through their fingers, that soon they would have to choose between love and the lives they had always known. The day of Alejandro's departure loomed closer, casting a heavy shadow over each secret moment he and Isabel shared. They knew this might be the last time they'd see each other, yet neither dared to speak of it. The risk of being caught had grown too great, but the thought of parting was more unbearable than the threat of punishment. So on the eve of his departure, they met one last time in the stone sanctuary of the mission garden, hidden beneath the ancient olive trees, their hearts pounding with a mix of desperation and love. Isabel was trembling, her heart torn between the future her family had laid out for her and the life she dreamed of with Alejandro. "Promise me," she whispered, "promise me you'll return, that this won't be the end for us." Her voice cracked, and her eyes shone with tears. Alejandro's hand tightened around hers. He leaned close, pressing his forehead to hers, his voice a mere whisper. "I swear I'll find a way back to you, Isabel. Even if I have to defy every order, I will come back." They held each other in the silence, as if trying to freeze this moment in time, but the night couldn't stop the dawn, and with it came the call for him to join his regiment. The next morning, Alejandro rode out of the mission with his fellow soldiers, leaving Isabel watching from a hidden place among the stone arches. She clutched a rosary he had given her as a token, feeling its beads like a lifeline as he disappeared over the horizon. Days turned to weeks, and then months with no word of Alejandro's return. Isabel's family pressed her to move forward with her engagement, and despite her protests, preparations began. She found herself feeling trapped, the life she was about to enter suffocating her with each passing day. Still, she clung to Alejandro's promise, even as her family's patience grew thin. Then, one evening, as Isabel prepared herself for what would be her final acceptance of the life chosen for her, word came that a battle had erupted in the Northern Territories. Her heart sank, fearing the worst. Days later, she overheard a conversation among the villagers. Alejandro's regiment had been ambushed, and survivors were few. Isabel felt the ground fall away beneath her. The life she dreamed of, the love she dared to hope for, seemed to slip from her grasp. Just as she resigned herself to the unbearable loss, a figure appeared in the mission's courtyard late one night. His clothes were tattered, his body worn, but it was Alejandro, standing in the shadows, waiting for her. When their eyes met, everything around them fell away. She ran to him, and he pulled her into an embrace that spoke of every tear, every prayer, every promise he had kept to find her again. Alejandro explained that he had survived the ambush and deserted the army to return to her, knowing that the only life he wanted was one spent by her side. The cost of his decision was high. He would be hunted, branded a traitor, and they would have to leave everything they'd ever known behind. But in that moment, all that mattered was that they were together. They agreed to flee to abandon the mission's walls and the life of expectations they'd both been bound to. In the quiet hours before dawn, they left, taking only what they could carry and the strength of their love. They disappeared into the vast landscape, determined to find a place where their love could flourish beyond the reach of war, duty, and societal demands. For the first time, they were free, choosing love over everything they'd been told was unchangeable. And as they walked, hand in hand, away from the life they'd left behind, Isabel looked up at Alejandro, her heart full of hope and gratitude. She knew their journey would not be easy, that the world would forever judge them as outcasts, but in that moment, they had each other, and that was worth any price.